Long before Toronto became a hub of finance, culture, and diversity, it was a fur trading outpost, balanced on the edge of destruction, repeatedly reshaped by fire, war, and the ambitions of those who fought for control. Toronto matters because it is more than just Canada's biggest city. It is a living record of Indigenous resilience, colonial struggle, immigration waves, and reinvention against all odds. The city's history reveals the blueprint of Canada itself, its conflicts, its compromises, and its dreams. Located on the northern shore of Lake Ontario, Toronto sits on one of the most strategic pieces of land in North America, a crossroads of rivers, forests, and lakes. It connected Indigenous trade routes for thousands of years before Europeans arrived. Its geography alone made it destined to be contested, fought over, and transformed. So let's trace Toronto's journey, from ancient pathways to global metropolis. Long before skyscrapers rose over Bay Street, this land was alive with Indigenous nations, the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and later the Mississaugas of the Credit River, all lived, traded, and traveled across what is now Toronto. The very word Toronto itself comes from the Mohawk phrase Tkaronto, meaning where there are trees standing in the water. It referred to a place north of the city where stakes were driven into the water for fishing weirs. Over time, the name shifted south, attached to the region we know today. This land was more than a home. It was a vital artery of trade. The Toronto Carrying Place Trail, stretching from Lake Ontario north to the Holland River and beyond, linked Indigenous peoples to the Great Lakes and into the interior of the continent. For thousands of years, Toronto was not a city, but a corridor of survival, economy, and diplomacy. When Europeans arrived, this corridor became something far more dangerous, a frontier of empire. By the 1600s, European demand for beaver pelts had reshaped the continent. The French, based in Quebec, saw the Toronto Passage as a critical link to the Western fur trade. In the early 18th century, they built a series of trading posts, including Fort Rouilly in 1750, near today's exhibition grounds. But their claim was fragile. The British were pushing westward from New York, while Indigenous alliances shifted constantly. Fort Rouilly became a pawn in this struggle, abandoned and destroyed by its own garrison in 1759 during the French retreat in the 7 Years' War. Toronto once again was left without Europeans, but its fate was already sealed. The land was too strategic to be left alone. After Britain's victory in 1763, all of New France came under British control. Toronto remained a wilderness, but only for a time. Following the American Revolution, Loyalists fled north, and Britain looked to secure its new colony. In 1787, the British negotiated the Toronto Purchase with the Mississaugas of the Credit, acquiring the land around Lake Ontario. The deal, however, was deeply flawed. Boundaries were unclear, and the Mississaugas later argued they had been cheated out of their land for a fraction of its value. The dispute would linger for over 2 centuries, not formally settled until 2010.
But with the land in their hands, the British had a plan. In 1793, Lieutenant Governor John Graves Simcoe founded the town of York, named after the Duke of York. Simcoe chose the site because it was defensible and sheltered by the Toronto Islands. His goal? To create a new capital for Upper Canada, safe from potential American invasion. But York's story was about to be written in fire and blood. In April 1813, during the War of 1812, American forces launched an attack on York. The town was poorly defended, and the British retreated, blowing up their own magazine in the process. The explosion killed hundreds, including the American commander. The Americans captured and looted York, burning public buildings, including the Parliament. Though they soon withdrew, the scars of that invasion would last. York had been humbled, but it also revealed something deeper. This fragile settlement, barely 2 decades old, was already a symbol of empire, conflict, and survival. After the war, York began to rebuild. But the town's name carried the memory of defeat. In 1834, the citizens decided to rebrand. York became Toronto, a return to the Indigenous name that had always been tied to the land. At the same time, Toronto was growing. It became incorporated as a city with a population of about 9,000. But beneath this growth lay tensions. Only 3 years later, in 1837, rebellion broke out. William Lyon Mackenzie led an uprising against the colonial elite, known as the Family Compact. The rebels were defeated, but the message was clear. Toronto was a city of political struggle, restless and unwilling to remain silent. And yet, Toronto's greatest tests were still to come. Plagues, fires, and waves of immigrants that would reshape its soul forever. In the mid-19th century, Toronto was no shining capital. It was crowded, dirty, and vulnerable. Epidemics swept through, including cholera outbreaks in the 1830s and 1850s that killed thousands. Fires were another constant threat. In 1849, the Great Fire of Toronto destroyed much of the downtown core, including St. James Cathedral. The city rebuilt, brick by brick, with stricter building codes, but the memory of ash haunted the skyline. Meanwhile, immigration transformed the city. The Great Famine of Ireland in the 1840s brought thousands of Irish refugees to Toronto. Poor, sick, and desperate, many died in fever sheds near the waterfront. Yet, those who survived became a lasting part of the city's identity. Toronto was becoming a city of survivors. Each disaster, each wave of newcomers, added another layer to its story. By the late 19th century, Toronto was no longer just a colonial outpost. Railways connected it to the interior, factories rose, and commerce flourished. By 1900, Toronto's population had surged past 200,000.
But with industry came inequality. Wealthy families built grand homes along Jarvis Street, while the working poor crowded into slums like the Ward. The contrast was stark. Mansions beside shanties, progress beside poverty. And Toronto's politics grew fierce. It became a battleground between Protestant and Catholic communities, between Orange Order parades and Irish Catholic workers. The city's streets were alive with both prosperity and unrest. And then Toronto faced one of the darkest chapters in its history, a tragedy that shocked the nation. On April 19, 1904, fire once again consumed Toronto. Beginning in a neckwear factory, flames swept across downtown, destroying over 100 buildings and leaving thousands jobless. Yet remarkably, only one life was lost. The fire was devastating, but it sparked another rebirth. Toronto rebuilt with stronger materials, modern infrastructure, and a growing sense of resilience. This was not the first time Toronto had been burned, but it was the last time fire would threaten its existence. From here, the city began its climb into modernity. The 20th century reshaped Toronto more than any other era. During World War I, thousands of Torontonians enlisted, and the city expanded its industrial base to support the war effort. After the war, waves of immigrants, Italians, Jews, Chinese, and others poured into Toronto, changing its neighborhoods and cultures. But Toronto was not without conflict. In 1933, anti-Semitic riots broke out at Christie Pitts, a reminder of the city's deep divisions. World War II brought new growth, and the post-war years transformed Toronto entirely. Suburbs sprawled, highways were built, and immigration laws opened the door to newcomers from Asia, the Caribbean, and beyond. By the 1970s, Toronto had overtaken Montreal as Canada's largest city. And here's the surprise. Toronto didn't just grow. It reinvented itself as one of the most multicultural cities in the world. By the late 20th century, Toronto was no longer a colonial outpost, nor a provincial capital overshadowed by others. It was the beating heart of Canada's economy, culture, and identity. Skyscrapers rose in the financial district. The CN Tower, completed in 1976, became a global symbol of modern Toronto. The city hosted the world, from the 1976 Paralympics to the 2015 Pan Am Games. Immigration continued to define Toronto. Today, more than half of its residents were born outside Canada. The city is home to over 200 ethnic origins, with neighborhoods from Chinatown to Little Italy, Little Jamaica to Greektown, Koreantown to Little India. Toronto had become what its geography had always hinted at, a crossroads of the world. Here's the part of Toronto's history many overlook. For centuries, this land was not freely given. The 1787 Toronto Purchase remained contested, with the Mississaugas of the Credit arguing they had been misled. Only in 2010 did Canada and the Mississaugas reach a settlement more than 200 years after the deal. It is a reminder that Toronto's story is not just of triumph, but of survival, loss, and the unfinished legacy of colonialism. Beneath the skyscrapers lies a deeper truth. Toronto was built on contested land, and its history remains alive in the voices of those who first called it home. Today, Toronto is a city of contrasts: historic streets beside soaring towers, immigrant neighborhoods beside financial empires. It is both a survivor of war, fire, and plague, and a builder of art, music, and innovation. Every corner tells a story. Union Station, once a grand gateway for newcomers. Kensington Market, born from Jewish immigrants, now a global village. The CN Tower, once the tallest in the world, now a marker of ambition. So the next time you walk Toronto's streets, remember, this was once a fur trading post, a battlefield, a burning ruin. And yet it rose again and again until it became one of the great cities of the world. If you enjoyed the history of Toronto, let me know in the comments which city I should explore next. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.